Hello, day drinkers. Welcome to Day Drinking with Authors. I'm your host, Molly Fader, Molly O'Keefe. This is the interview series in which I pick a book and the author picks a drink and we discuss both. And, I know I say this every time, but the reality is there's never a bad book because I'm only reading books I want to read. So I get the beautiful, joyful job of just constantly recommending books. And this week's book, The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis, it's an instant New York Times bestseller, and it's an instant New York Times bestseller for a really, really good reason. It's unputdownable, 100%. The history is so interesting, and I have so many questions for Fiona. But first, I'm going to read. Oh, yeah. First, I'm going to read the back cover. I'm sorry, my daughter was like mooning me on the other side of the window there. First, I'm going to read the back cover copy because my mom likes that. Mom, I think you have this book. You should. Your book club would be all over it. So The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis, instant New York Times bestseller. 8 months since losing her mother in the Spanish flu outbreak of 1919, 21-year-old Lillian Carter's life has completely fallen apart. For the past 6 years, under the moniker Angelica, Lillian was one of the most sought-after artist models in New York City, with statues based on her figure gracing landmarks from the Plaza Hotel to the Brooklyn Bridge. But with her mother gone, a grieving Lillian is rudderless and desperate. The work has dried up, and a looming scandal has left her entirely without a safe haven. So when she stumbles upon an employment opportunity at the Frick Mansion, a building that ironically bears her own visage, Lillian jumps at the chance. But the longer she works as a private secretary to the imperious and demanding Helen Frick, the daughter and heiress of the industrialist and art patron Henry Clay Frick, the more deeply her life gets intertwined with that of the family, pulling her into a tangled web of romantic trysts, stolen jewels, and family drama that runs so deep the stakes just may be life or death. Nearly 50 years later, English model Veronica Weber has her own chance to make her career and with it earn the money she needs to support her family back home within the walls of the former Frick residence, now converted into one of the New York City's most impressive museums. But when she, along with a charming intern budding art curator named Joshua, is dismissed from the Vogue shoot taking place at the Frick collection, she chances upon a series of hidden messages in the museum, messages that will lead her and Joshua on a hunt that could not only solve Veronica's financial woes, but could finally reveal the truth behind a decades-old murder in the infamous Frick family. There's so much there to love. So if you are watching this, let's bring in Fiona. Hello, Fiona.
Hello, thank you for having me. That's quite a mouthful. Thank you for reading all that.
The art of back cover copy of like having to hint and allude to all the things that are going on without spoiling everything it's an art. And that's some good back cover copy.
Yeah, I realize there's just so much going on in this book. It's really hard to sum it up in, 3 sentences. I've been asked and I can't do it.
Do you ever have they call it an elevator pitch? Have you ever been able to have an elevator pitch?
I
for any of
do.
your books?
I'll have one, but it's always, you have to talk about both timelines. So it's more like a escalator pitch. It takes longer to do.
Yeah, it's pretty impossible. And it's funny having read the book. And a lot of it has to do with that time period. There's so much going on. The Spanish flu is going on, right? We're post World War I. We're going into World War II. I mean, it is a rich and interesting period of time. For all of you joining in, it's so great to see you. Thanks for coming. If you ask a question, I actually have a paperback copy of this book that I will mail to some lucky questioner. So please feel free to ask questions. Fiona, I was wondering, this whole series that you have of telling stories in New York City landmark buildings, like what a lightning bolt idea. Can you think back to like how this all started? Like when you sat up in bed and you were like, I've got it.
Yeah, actually it didn't come until after the first book was published, and that was the one set at the Barbizon Hotel for Women, the Dollhouse. And that book just came about organically. I was a journalist at the time, and I wanted to write an article about the women who lived there and who had lived in the Barbizon Hotel for Women for years and years. And they were very private, and so I knew it couldn't be an article. And I started thinking, well, maybe it could be a book.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
and so that's where I wrote that book from, was thinking, "Oh, let me see if I can do it. It'll be a challenge. Let me see if I can pull it off." And I love mysteries and I love historical fiction, so I thought, I'll do a blend of that. So it's writing the book I wanted to read. And after that, I was thinking, "Oh, I should write another one, I guess." And I was yeah, it was
That's
really
how that usually goes.
yeah, it did really well, and I think we were all kind of surprised that it broke out. And so I was just wandering around the Upper West Side of New York, where I've lived for over 30 years now. And I was passing the Dakota and the sun was hitting it and it was just glowing. And I was like, oh, it'd be fun to get in there and see if I could snoop around and write a story about that. Cause that building is, over 100 years old. Think of the history I could write about.
Mhm.
And then that's when I realized, oh yeah, there's more buildings. And I have this real need to snoop around. I love getting into old buildings and, walking around and seeing what they were like, and, all the old vestiges of, the molding and the fireplaces and what was it like 100 years ago. I just crave that knowledge. And there's just so many great buildings here that I thought, oh, right, I guess this is what I'm doing. So it came very organically. I was as surprised as you were.
Well, I feel like as I was reading the book, and as a person who's done some traveling and gone through tours of famous buildings, it felt like you remembered every story the tour guide told you. Like it was just, and there was, you have to put together such a puzzle, particularly for this. I mean, I think it's true for all of your books, but in talking
Mhm.
about this, but like, how are you going to discuss the Spanish flu? How are you going to discuss this Angelica, the first supermodel? So I guess I'm going to try to make this a question.
I get it. I get it.
This will not be 30 minutes of me asking you how you did it and then
I
telling you to write.
love it. I love it. Keep it
Um,
coming.
how do you decide? Because I'd imagine that you have quite a bit of research stockpiled. Like, how do you decide which stories get which things? Like, get which details?
Yeah, when I first start researching, I'm just reading everything I can and talking to people who are experts and getting behind the scenes tours. And I'm just basically cramming information into my brain as much as I can. And just certain things start popping out. And I know if something jumps out at me, that I should write that down, and that
Mhm.
should be something. So, for example, learning that Audrey Munson, who was the actual supermodel of the 1910s, and whose image is carved into the above the entrance of the Frick, learning, oh, who's that woman? Oh, that's Audrey Munson. Oh my goodness, this was her life. And just going down a rabbit hole of what her life was like, as she was this very successful artist model, got caught up in a scandal, fell on really hard times. And I just started thinking, I wonder if she was ever in the house. Like, what was her connection to the Frick house? How close was it? And just trying to figure out if I could draw her into the story in some way, because her story was so unique. And
Mhm.
here's this woman who can be found on statues all over Manhattan today. She's everywhere, every corner, in front of the Plaza Hotel, the New York Public Library, Columbus Circle. She's everywhere. And yet no one has heard of her. No one knows her name.
I mean, do you feel like that's a part of the fact that what she was doing was considered like beneath like polite society?
Yeah.
Or is it because she ended up in this murder scandal? Or did she end up in this murder scandal because of the views of polite society?
No, no. I think, she was very celebrated in the artistic bohemian world. It was okay to take off your clothes and pose for men who weren't your husband. In the proper world, like in the Frick's elite world, their daughters would never do that. That would never be allowed. So it was more of a bohemian Greenwich Village thing
Right.
that she was doing. And she was just considered this perfect neoclassical beauty. She was considered just gorgeous. And the kind of scandal that she gets caught up in is really just really no fault of her own. And it's early on in the book, so I can kind of mention it, where her landlord kills his wife, and then the police find a black and white photo of her in a bathing suit from an ad that she'd done. And this is the truth. This is what really happened. And they assumed it was a love triangle and just started hounding her, and the press did as well. And
And then
so that really happened. And so that's the impetus for the book really starting out.
And you must feel like when you're doing the research and you land on a story like that, I mean, I don't do the kind of research that you do, but it's like it must feel like just like a full body tingle. Like
Yes.
I'm onto something. Let's do this.
Yes, and the thing was I was thinking, well, how do I get her in the house? Because it's supposed to be set at the house, but boy, this is a great story. And what a character, what a personality, what a life. And
Mm,
so what I did was I decided to bring her into the house and have her meet the Frick family as she becomes the private secretary to Helen Frick as a way to hide out from the scandal. And and so she can get into the house, but then in the author's note explain really clearly, okay, the Fricks were real people. Here's what their lives were. This character Lillian is based on this other person. Here's what her life. Yes, they're connected by the mansion, but there's no sign that they ever met. And so
mhm.
I want to make sure the reader understands what's made up and what's not, especially in this book.
Can you talk a little bit about that leap that you make between where your research is and where your research gets you, and then where the story needs to go? And having read your books, it's different in every book. Do you have a like, is it just like an instinctual, like, oh, I'm not gonna, but here I will, or like tell us a little bit about how you decide what to fictionalize and how far to take it and where to go?
That it's a really good question because in all the other books, I would do all the research and find out something interesting about the building. Like in the New York Public Library, when they built it, they included this 7-room apartment inside it where the super and his family lived. And so you read that and you're like, "Ooh, family living in the library, check. All right, I'm going to do that." And then I created a fictional family, completely fictional in that book, so that I could, have them live the life I needed them to do and go on the adventures and have the
Murder.
yeah, murder, mayhem, yeah. And so this is the first book that I was merging fictional characters inspired by people and then real people because the Frick family had to be included. They were really interesting people. And B, it would be weird to rename the house. You know what I mean? It would
Yeah,
just be too much.
that
But I
doesn't
was
work.
really nervous about it, to be honest, because I hadn't used real people before. I'd used real situations and real setups for the building, but not real people. So the response has been great. Especially I love Helen Frick, who is a pretty prickly character in the book and was in real life. I just love that people adore her as much as I do. That
Yeah,
you feel like you're meeting this person again, like Lillian or like Audrey Munson, who's been overshadowed by the men in her life
yeah.
and whose name is not as well known as it should be.
Yeah, I was wondering about that with the Frick family because you know, you're walking a fine line with that family and with your representation of the family and the knowledge that we have about the family. And it's the fine line that we're kind of walking as a society where you have these pillars of New York City. I mean, the Frick family, the Frick collection, this house, like a pillar
Mhm.
of New York City. But you don't get to be a pillar of New York City in the 19 whatevers without being an absolute awful human. And so you have to, you like, that balancing act had to be so tricky of keeping them interesting and compelling and finding their humanity. Like how, like, did you write yourself off into corners and have to pull yourself back? What was that process?
I'm really lucky in that there's been a lot written about them, including one of their descendants has written huge coffee table biographies of both Henry and Helen.
Oh,
And they're
wow.
chock full of details, many of which I wish I could have included in the book because they're so juicy and interesting. And I couldn't use them all. But she really did a lot of research and uncovered a lot of which is in the book. And so a tragedy that happened in the family back when Helen was very young that really affected them. The wife Adelaide really retreating from view and
Mm.
how Henry and Helen's relationship became really quite close in not the healthiest way.
Yeah, and destructive.
Yes.
Good and close and destructive.
Yeah, and the thing about Henry Frick is he was this union busting tough guy, who did a few really awful things in his life, and got away with it because he was really really rich, and so I think it's okay. They're not saints, and
Mhm.
so in a way that makes it easier to write about them because they're full-fledged people, and hopefully they come off as three-dimensional on the page.
Mhm.
And they're just so interesting. I don't think you could make up a character as interesting as Helen or Henry
Helen.
Frick.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. One of the things that to sort of circle back, I wanted to ask you about, and I passed over to talk about the Fricks. The scavenger hunt. So in the book, one of the things that ties the dual timelines together is some these notes that are found, and what do they all mean? I won't give anything away. You made that up, right?
Yeah, I did. I needed something because what Mr. Frick did was he really collected this beautiful artwork. And that's what the Frick collection is all about. It's the art on the walls, it's the Turners and the Renoirs and the Vermeers. And I wanted to include the art because it's such a huge part of his and Helen's relationship and his legacy. But I didn't want the reader to feel like, oh gosh, I'm learning about a Renoir. Shut that and go get a drink. I wanted to make it interesting. And so I came up with the idea of a scavenger hunt that would link, like you said, both timelines and kind of solve a mystery and lead people in the direction of possibly finding this, missing pink diamond. And that was really fun to do because Helen, who's the one who creates the scavenger hunt, does it in poetry, in
Mhm.
rhyming poem, and they're terrible. And it was terrible poet. And it was
I
just
mean, I didn't want to
so
say it.
much fun to take these beautiful works of art and create the most horrific poem about it that I could, that would hopefully be part of a scavenger hunt that would lead these people on the clues. It was so much fun to write. It came way too easy. I was a little nervous about that.
Oh, that's fun. Oh, that's so fun. Well, it is. I mean, it's also one of the things I think that readers, as a reader of dual timeline historical fiction, is you want that concrete connection between the two. And I mean, there's a lot of ways to do that, but these notes were like, you as a reader, you just get a little giddy. Did you know that going in as you were drafting, or was it a thing that you kind of got stuck and you had to put it in to get you?
I knew it going in, and I can't remember how I got the idea. I don't remember how that came to be, but I knew early on that there would be a scavenger hunt that would connect the two stories.
No.
But it's funny, I'm not quite sure how that came in. And so as I was looking at the artwork in the museum, I would notate, oh, that would be a good one for the scavenger hunt, and picking out the paintings and the things that would reflect on the characters who are viewing them in
Yeah.
an interesting
And
way.
it is such a good way because the art is in a book about the Frick mansion, you expect there to be long and lots of descriptions of art, and you are able to make that so interactive with that
Yeah.
scavenger hunt. So that was a nice little gift. That was a nice little gift. So the Lillian timeline and the when she's working for Helen, that all makes sense. So tell us about the second timeline. So it's the 1960s, it's a mansion, um, Veronica and
Yep.
Joshua. Tell us
Yeah.
how Veronica Weber. Sorry, I was like, I paused there because I wrote it down. Um, tell us how that got created, or
Yeah,
why you chose that time period.
I wanted the 60s because I hadn't worked in it before in any of the other books, so I thought that would be interesting. And then I only realized this recently, during an interview, but in that timeline, I really limited everything. I kept it to a minimal number of characters, a limited time period, and a limited setting. So most of it takes place over 3 days because they're trapped inside the Frick Museum during a blizzard. It's only two people, Veronica, and who's a model, and the intern Joshua, and it's all at the Frick pretty much. And I realized I did that probably because I was writing it during quarantine, and I hadn't
Oh,
made that connection
interesting.
until like a week ago, and I was asked a question about it. But I think that was it, just wanting to keep it really insular and see what these two characters could do as they're complete strangers stuck in this beautiful mansion in the dark. And how do they manage? How will their relationship change over time? And so that's really where that came from. And Veronica is very much a fish out of water. She's from England. She's an up and coming model. In the beginning, she's doing a Vogue photo shoot at the Frick, which goes terribly wrong. And so the consequences are really high for her.
Mhm.
in terms of
Yeah.
what's going to happen over the next 3 days and how is she going to extricate herself from this museum and possibly solve all of her financial problems.
Yeah,
Um,
it was an interesting, her fortunes were rising as a model as Lillian's were crashing and burning.
yes.
And I loved it. Veronica's whole like modeling career is based on this terrible haircut.
Yeah, I
It
was
was just
doing, you know where that came from? I was doing a Google search for Vogue models to kind of see, or 1960s models, because I knew Twiggy, I
oh,
knew the main ones, but I wanted to get a sense of what they would look like. And I found this one, and I have to find her name, who had the weirdest bowl haircut that was, back then really mod, but it was like jet black hair in a bowl around her head. And I thought, oh, that's my girl.
I mean, if her hair was not that way, she'd be a lovely girl, but there was just something about it, and I loved it, and she was like, "Yeah, I know, with a haircut. That's the haircut."
Right, and that her mom did it, accidentally. She was trying for something else, and her mom gave her that haircut, and that turned her into a model because that's what would happen in the 60s, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, for sure. What and I do love the idea that they're in this locked door mystery, and it feels like a lot of the tension from the Lillian time frame comes from the constraints of the society. And you feel quite a bit of that in the later time frame with Joshua, but because they're alone, there's this freedom and this kind of like they're able to get very comfortable with each other very quickly. And um it was just such a contrast from the past timeline to the present timeline where you didn't have to worry about the days and like, how do you keep making them run into each other? They're locked.
That's true. Yeah, you solve a lot of problems when you do that, but you also cause them because there's no let up, you know?
Mhm.
They're just the 2 of them, so what's that journey gonna be? 'Cause
Right.
they're not 2 people who would normally be drawn to each other. He's an expert in the frick art. She's, didn't go to college.
She's
Um
got this haircut.
Yeah, she's America, and it's the '60s, and he's Black and she's white. And, I was writing it during the 20s when, America was in a lot of turmoil, and I was curious as to be able to include what's missing in very Eurocentric art history, and that's diverse perspectives.
Mhm.
The Frick walls are, a lot of white rich people painted by white painters. And so I thought Joshua, if he's someone who's trying to kind of rise in the art world and create his own way, he could offer this a perspective of what's missing
Mhm.
and just fill in the larger context of what's going on the Frick walls and what the Frick family was about. And it was really interesting because I was able to talk to art curators and art experts about what their experiences were coming up in the art world and kind of pull in some of what they had gone through and suffered through,
Yeah.
as well as the amazing job it is to work in art. And so that was a fun, interesting angle to hopefully bring to it, and see what happened when the two got together.
Um, I don't know if you do this, as a writer, but do you ever I mean, we know what happens to Lillian. Um, do you wonder where are they? Do you think about them? Joshua and
Oh,
Veronica?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm very positive about what happens to them. I think. Yeah,
I've
yeah.
just spent the last few days, doing the dishes and going, "Wonder what happened to them?"
I know. Maybe they'll have a book of their own down the road, right?
Oh, that would be awesome. Here we
That'd
have
be
a
great.
question from Sharon.
Mhm.
Has the Frick remained basically the same all this time?
Oh, that's a great question. It really has. And that's what makes it so wonderful. When you step into it, it really is like stepping back in time. The first floor, which is the floor that's open to the public, is, really like it was in the 1914 to 1920. And that's when Mr. Frick lived there. He died in 1919. And so you walk in and there's these beautiful furnishings and rugs and the art on the walls. And I highly recommend, if you want to see it, go to frick.org and you can click on, they have a floor plan that gives you a 360-degree view of the public rooms. And so you can go in the stairwell and you can see where the organ is, and you can, see all these you can see the gallery, the art gallery with all of his work on it. And that was really helpful. But back in the day, in the basement, there was a kitchen, there's a bowling alley, which is still there
Yeah,
today,
that's
which is
madness.
wild. And the second floors were for the family's bedrooms, and the top floor was for the maids. And these days, of course, those second and third floors are administrative offices. But it is beautifully preserved, and they're actually renovating it right now so that you'll be able to go up to the second floor, which will
Mm.
be really nice, and kind of wander around there. So there's a lot of interesting things in the works for it, but it really feels like it's unchanged.
So the research for this book was done largely, I would imagine, as you were writing in quarantine, and you had those resources of the frick.org, but it's not being there.
No.
So how, but at the same time, you can access it all the time. You can like, where was, like there, I mean, there's a part of that. Like, so how was the researching for this book?
It was interesting because, yeah, normally I go back multiple times, but here I got this great behind the scenes tour in January 2020, and then we locked down in March. But yeah, I was on that site. I have it bookmarked still right now. And I would go on, I'd be writing a scene and click on that, jump into the floor plan, figure out what's above the fireplace, jump back into the manuscript. So that was really helpful. And also, what's wonderful is the Frick organization has amazing archivists on staff, and their archives are, many of them are digitized. So they could
Wow.
send me things like menus from a dinner party from 1915 and a guest list, and written in pencil, or the payroll of, it was a family of 3 served by a staff of 27. And so I could see, who were these 27 people and how did they interact? Like, what was that like for the maids and the organist and the chauffeur?
Yeah.
And that to me is really quite fascinating.
Yeah. That's, it's funny. I mean, you think about all the stuff in your life that you just throw away. I mean, like I went, my son's changing his room, and I had all their like artwork from wherever stored up there. I was like, oh, I got to go through this. And I had saved all these like daycare, like the daycare. Mick pooped at this time, and he had this for lunch and stuff like that, and you're like, I can't keep this. Can I
Right.
keep it?
I don't know.
I mean, we're never going to be the Frick Mansion, but I mean, that would
Right.
be interesting at some point. But it proves that, like, distance and time makes all that stuff really fascinating.
It really does. And it's just amazing what has been saved, and how helpful it is. Because if you're writing historical fiction, you're looking for those details that really make it sing. I don't want to sit there and describe the sofa for 3 paragraphs.
Right.
But if I can have like a groovy dish from the dinner menu that they serve that will make the reader just go, oh,
Right.
oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting, then that's just enough to make it sparkle and feel like it's historical, when really you're just dealing with personalities who, over time, they all have the same issues. It's betrayal or
Yeah.
romance or whatever. So kind of plopping them in the 1910s versus the 1960s, it's just about the fashion and what they eat
Right.
and kind of
The
detail.
trappings.
Those are the things that change.
We have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Who is the most interesting character to research for this book, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. It would definitely be a tie, I think, between Helen Frick, who was this, really powerhouse of a woman, who she was described in a New Yorker article in 1939 as a woman of extremely robust prejudices. And I love, it's so subtle. Because things like she hated Germans,
Uh-huh.
she wouldn't allow a German to work on her property or in her library that she created later. And like a German last name, even if they were born in America, German last name cannot enter, cannot work for her. She, if anyone got a bob haircut, any of her girlfriends, she would dump them because she thought that was too modern. She wore a pompadour with a bun most of her entire adult life. She was just really set in her ways. And when her father died, she was left $38 million, which made her the richest unmarried woman in America. So she was a powerhouse,
Yeah.
and did so many good things. She went to France during World War I with, she created a Red Cross unit, went over there, helped French refugees. And at the same time, she was this kind of quirky duck. And so it was so much fun to learn all these things about her, both good and disturbing,
Right.
and then create this woman who had a lot of power and didn't really know how to use it.
What to do with it, right. And
Yeah.
was wounded, like, was
Yes.
pretty like, she was striking out from a place of real wounds.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a traumatic life for her, I
Yeah.
think, early on especially.
Another question, were you able to speak to anyone from the Frick family, friends or people who knew them, grandchildren? Is there anybody?
I think there are. I you know what? I relied on the books that a Frick descendant wrote that were so helpful. And I didn't. I knew I wanted to create characters that were my own in a way. And so I didn't want to betray anyone's feeling about their great grandfather. I felt like
Right.
that would be a little much. And
Oh, right, yeah.
there's so much printed about them already that I could kind of work around it. But it's been nice. I've heard some that some people have reached out and said that they really love it, and also I have to say that the staff at the Frick collection have just been so supportive, and they're so excited that it hit the New York Times list, and it's just been great. We're working together on a few things that will be come bubbling up down the road, but
Oh, that's
it's
great.
been great to work so closely with the organization because they're terrific.
Um, Here's a comment. I loved it when Lillian considered trying to get Helen to style her hair differently for the dinner party, and they decided not to go there.
That was fun. That was really fun to describe because especially in 1919, the fashions and the hairstyles were changing so quickly. You were moving from, that Edwardian
Mm,
feeling to the jazz age. And so to have this woman who's kind of reluctant to move ahead and her private secretary who's trying to, she wants to get her married, she wants to get her taken care of. And Helen just is not standing for it because she's,
no,
she's
not gonna do it. And I felt like it came from, again, from the wound thing, but almost a
Mhm.
place of being embarrassed, right?
Yeah.
Like not wanting to try and fear of looking foolish,
Yeah.
you know? It
Yeah.
was very sweet. So I'm gonna I know that I said it would take a half hour, but I have one question. This is extremely writerly.
I
So we're
love
gonna
it.
get into the nitty-gritty here. So I
Love
was
it.
reading this book and I was like 3/4 of the way through and I was like, I don't know how I like it's one of those past the bedtime, all that stuff, easy
Mhm.
reading, but I know that easy reading is very hard. Like what is keeping these pages turning? And I mean, obviously a great story, lots of different mysteries, but I realized on like a writer sense that as you were going in both timelines, the questions we were asking ourselves as the reader about these characters were like tiny little cliffhangers. They were
Mhm.
soft cliffhangers.
Mhm.
And then as the book went on, the cliffhangers became cliffhangers, like it was danger and trouble and oh my God, who's coming up the stairs? And oh my God, like who's in the house and all this stuff. And I it was it's kind of a as a writer, it's kind of a blow your mind sort of thing. And I was wondering, does that happen to you for you? Do you draft that way or do you edit that sort of stuff in? Does your editor help you with that? Or have you made a decision on how you handle chapter endings? You're nodding like, yes, Molly, of
Yeah,
course.
no, it's such a good question, though. It's such a good question. I definitely do that. I definitely when I outline the book before I start writing it, so I know what's gonna happen in each chapter, but my s I have this kind of, you know, I like to wrap things up and get things done, so I'll write a chapter, and it ends at the normal end of the chapter, right? When
Mhm.
everything's wrapped up. And then I often stop and go, "Nope, nope, nope," and I cut that chunk right when that scene is about to peak, and then move that chunk over to the next chapter. You know what I mean? So it's like just switching the scene around so that you are left on a cliffhanger. I love books. I think Kate Quinn does
Mhm.
that beautifully, and it's just fun to do. It's kind of tormenting the reader, but it's so much fun.
But it's why we show up. It's why readers show up. Um, Andrew Piper, who's a Canadian horror writer, he talks about that too, about chapter endings, and he wrote, actually, you'd probably really like it, an amazing, oh, I'm gonna forget the title of it, but about in the Jackson family White House, in the Jackson White House, there was a ghost. They believe that there was a ghost, and he is a horror writer, so it gets really scary, but it's
Mm,
also all of this, like, very historical stuff around the White House, so you'd probably dig it. The
brilliant.
Homecoming. I think it's called The Homecoming.
Okay.
Anyway, um, but he talks about how he just, like, every chapter end when he goes through and edits, he just takes off, like, the last 2 sentences, and it leaves it feeling more, like, artful.
Yes.
Like, and I feel like what you're telling me is, like, you've gotta fight the instinct to sum it up or to finish it
Yeah.
and just yeah, it's
And
good.
that is my instinct, it's often like, "And then she fled into the night," you know what I mean? You instead of doing that, to cut it to like you said, 2 sentences before so that you don't know if she's gonna flee into the night, that gets you into the next chapter.
Yeah, it was I love that you're able to do that on the first go round because I feel like it's something I can barely make happen in the
No,
end.
no, I have to say,
So
I
good.
kind of aim for it in the first draft, and it's clunky and it's terrible, and usually the ending sentences are just like, laughably bad, but I'm just trying to get it there, and then it's later revisions that I do fine tune it, and I will go back and just work on endings,
Yeah.
um, for a day just to make sure they're all work and they're not repetitive or anything.
And it's I mean, it's that kind of fine tuning
Mhm.
that helps, instant New York Times bestsellers happen. So tell us what are you working on next? What have you got coming up? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, there's a couple fun things. So the first is I was asked to do a short story for Amazon that's part of an anthology of historical fiction authors that'll be out in the summer. And that one's set at Carnegie Hall in the 1950s, which is good fun.
Cool.
And then the next real novel, which will be out sometime next year, is set at Radio City Music Hall from the point of view of a Rockette. So we'll see where that goes. That's fun.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like, and what's the time
It'll
on
be late 50s. Hmm.
wow. So that feels like a little bit like a change of pace a tiny bit.
It might be a little bit, we'll see.
Oh,
We'll
that's
see. Yeah, it's
exciting.
it's really fun to work on, and I've been every book has some form of the arts in it, so, this one has art, there's jazz in the Dollhouse, there's theater in the Chelsea Girls, and so to work with dance is really fun because it's so active,
Yeah.
you can have so much happen and so much expression that these dancers are able to do, so that's been really fun.
Do you worry that you're gonna run out of buildings?
No, I joke around that I'll by like the 30th book, I'll be doing the gas station on the corner of 11th Avenue. No, I'll put a
And when it
group
was turned into a condo.
yeah, yeah. It'll work, it'll work.
Oh my goodness, Fiona, thank you so much for stopping by and taking the time. I know you're a busy lady. The Magnolia Palace was fantastic. Cannot wait for the rest of your books. Everybody out there, please pick up this book. You can find Fiona on social media. Facebook seems to be the best way to find her. She's very active on Facebook, but you do have Instagram and
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook, a little bit of Twitter, and my website is fionadavisbooks.com, which has everything.
awesome. Great. Everybody out there, please stay safe, have a drink, read a book, get vaccinated. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Molly.